of Zimbabwe, not touching at all specifically at the issues at hand. But continuing with that story, EFF leader Julius Malema has called for the closure of Zimbabwe's embassy in South Africa until the human rights situation in that country has been addressed. In a tweet, Malema said failure to close the embassy would result in the EFF preventing any Zimbabwean government official from participating in any gathering in South Africa. Zimbabwe has been wrecked by anti-government protests against soaring inflation, corruption and poor governance. Workers in the healthcare sector have also gone on strike as the number of COVID-19 patients grows. For more on the story, let's cross live to SABC political reporter Samkele Maseko, who is with EFF Head of International Relations Godrich Gardee. Samkele, what's Mr. Gardee saying today?
Yes, indeed, Desiree, we will be speaking to the EFF's Head of International Relations, Godrich Gardee, who is also the former Secretary General of the party. They, through their leader, Julius Malema, tweeted yesterday that the embassy of Zimbabwe should be closed and that failing which all Zimbabwean government officials whom would be speaking here in South Africa would be prevented from speaking. I'm going to bring in Godrich Gardee, the Head of EFF International Relations. Mr. Gardee, a very interesting tweet by the leader of the EFF, your leader, Julius Malema, and the closure of the Zimbabwean embassy here in South Africa. When did things go sour between the EFF and ZANU-PF and the Zimbabwean government?
It is a known convention that diplomats do not have to descend to the political arena in the country of their host. It was undiplomatic for a high commissioner to engage in a tussle with an opposition party of a domestic country that is hosting him. And as such, we will be calling on the Department of International Relations and Cooperation and the President to revoke his credentials, failure which, save for COVID-19, we will have organized a 50,000 person march to that embassy to close it ourselves if his government does not recall him.
How will that help in the human rights violations that are currently happening in Zimbabwe with the protests that have spread in the capital Harare and other parts of Zimbabwe? How will that help in solving the issues that the Zimbabwean people are facing?
You will know for a fact that during the apartheid, during our struggle against apartheid and for political freedom, all countries had the opportunity to actually voice their dissatisfaction with the conduct of the apartheid regime. And as of now, it can be different when political parties in another country actually raise issues about the human rights abuses under President Mnangagwa and also the human rights abuses, lack of freedom, lack of security. In particular, the issue of monetary compensation to the British white settlers. We have a right actually to speak about issues of other countries, just as they had a right to speak about issues of South Africa. And it is a convention throughout the world that parties can actually speak about issues of other countries, and Zimbabwe is not an exception, as South Africa was never an exception, as ZANU-PF actually then used to raise critical issues against the South African government then.
Mr. Gardee, you've got an issue where the president of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa, was speaking on the Zimbabwean Broadcasting Corporation earlier on today, and he touched nothing on the human rights or perceived human rights violations that are currently taking place in Harare and the broader country with the protest and them complaining about the corruption that's taking place in the country. What do you have to say about the Zimbabwean president and ZANU-PF, the General Secretary, Emmerson Mnangagwa, not saying anything about these human rights violations?
This calls upon the chairperson of the SADC community and the African Union, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, to actually rein on his counterpart and all other regional leaders in Africa to actually raise their concern about the killings of our people in Zimbabwe, the detention of the people of Zimbabwe, the human rights abuses in Zimbabwe, the lack of free political speech and activities in Zimbabwe, and in particular the compensation of the British white settlers for the theft of the land of the people of Zimbabwe.
When it comes to the Zimbabwean government, they didn't respond kindly to the EFF statement and to Julius Malema's comments on the current situation in the country in Zimbabwe. They literally identified him as a nobody leading an insignificant certain segment here within the South African political arena. What do you have to say about the Zimbabwean government seemingly throwing out its kindness to the EFF leader Julius Malema?
Well, as a matter of fact, we should remember that it is the duty of a political party in that particular country of Zimbabwe to raise critical issues when engaging with another political party of another country, but not the responsibility of a diplomat. We are more than ready to meet any political party, including ZANU-PF, to raise our concern about the way they are conducting their business, in particular on the land issue in Zimbabwe. However, the diplomat in South Africa, the High Commissioner of Zimbabwe, had a responsibility to raise his concern either with the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation or through a correspondence with the EFF Secretary General for a meeting of minds to discuss the concern of his government than to shout from the top of his voice as if he's not a diplomat. That's why they are being called diplomats, because they must be diplomatic. But as for the Information Minister of the Zimbabwean ZANU-PF government raising his voice out there, it's fine, he's out there in Zimbabwe. There is another day we will meet with him. But as a matter of fact, if we will be in charge no sooner than in South Africa, these are the kinds of high commissioners and diplomats whose credentials actually have to be revoked. He has a responsibility to sustain relationship between two sovereign states and not to engage and descend into the political arena with an opposition party of a host country.
But Mr. Gardee, are you not shouting on top of rooftops as well? Did you not issue out or try have some communication with ZANU-PF or with the Zimbabwean government with the human rights violations that are happening in that country, as opposed to rushing and tweeting or issuing out statements as not engaging with the Zimbabwean government or with ZANU-PF, that's effectively the political party leading that country?
It is a political responsibility for every human being in this universe to actually speak out against human rights abuses, detention, and jailing of political opponents in every country throughout the world. The same we will say about UK, the same we will say against on the embargo against Cuba, the same we will say against Israel on its attack or against the people of Palestine. The same we will say on Morocco colonizing the Western Sahara. The same we will say about the lack of freedom and democratic rights in Eswatini. We will say about Zimbabwe.
But Mr. Gardee, are you not being hypocritical as the EFF? And in particular, I will ask this of you because you're very close to Mr. Malema. Are you not being hypocritical? At some stage, Mr. Malema praised the policies of Zimbabwe, praised the political trajectory that Zimbabwe was taking, praised the late former president of Zimbabwe and former general secretary of ZANU-PF, that would be Robert Mugabe. Are you also not to blame for some of the atrocities and the human rights violations that are taking place in Zimbabwe?
Definitely not, Samkele. You will realize that there's a paradigm shift from the political policy position of the ZANU-PF in terms of the transition from the late President Robert Mugabe to President Mnangagwa. President Robert Mugabe did not initiate a land invasion and a land repossession, but it was the war veterans and the ordinary people of Zimbabwe who said, since the United Kingdom has reneged on the Lancaster Agreement to pay out the white settlers for the repossession of the land and restoration of the land rights and ownership to the people of Zimbabwe, we shall go take it upon ourselves to take the land. It was not President Mugabe. It was not led by the government of President Mugabe. Actually, what President Mnangagwa is doing is actually spitting on the graves of the heroes and the heroines of the liberation struggle of the people of Zimbabwe, because whatever was done by the people of Zimbabwe to get their land from the 4,000 British white settlers out of a 15 million black population of the people of Zimbabwe, it's uncalled for, and it's a tragedy and a travesty of justice.
Have you had an engagement with the ZANU-PF, with Zimbabwe EFF with regards to what's happening in the country and the way forward in resolving the human rights violations that are currently taking place in that country?
Definitely, the economic freedom fighters in South Africa is in contact with its allied forces and progressive forces, including EFF structures, but not mutually exclusively only to the EFF structures on the issues of Zimbabwe. and issues of other countries where we have to engage, because we need to engage with the rest of Africa.
What have your engagements been like with other political formations, opposition political formations in Zimbabwe, with the current situation currently plaguing the country?
In particular reference with the EFF structure of Zimbabwe, we are in touch, we are sharing correspondence, sharing notes, and we are engaging, and we have retweeted their statements, we have issued a statement in their support, and we have made our policy position with regard to the conduct of the Zimbabwean government very clear and in public.
What are you proactively doing in order to resolve the impasse that's there between the citizens and the government?
We are waiting to see what is happening with COVID-19, but as a matter of fact, we should be leading a very big march to the Zimbabwean High Commission. We should be calling on the president of this country to revoke the credentials of the High Commissioner of Zimbabwe in South Africa. We should be calling on the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation to convene that High Commissioner for a reprimand, and also call on the government to relay our message that they have to change this High Commissioner. Further than that, we call upon the chairperson of both the SADC and AU to rein on President Mnangagwa.
President Mnangagwa, addressing the nation earlier on today, said nothing about the human rights violations in that particular country. What does that say about African leaders when their own people are being violated by their governments and they're very mum? What does it say about leadership in the African continent?
Well, it's typical of all despots and dictators in the African continent, similarly to President Cyril Ramaphosa, who will never say anything about Marikana, even though he called for concomitant action. It is known of African leaders from the liberation movements, their conduct, wherein liberation movements tends to be villains against the very same people they actually liberated.
Thank you very much. Godrich Gardee, that was the head of EFF's International Relations, Mr. Godrich Gardee, basically speaking that they are calling for the High Commissioner of Zimbabwe here in South Africa to be deported back to his country of origin, that is Zimbabwe, and for his credentials to be revoked, also saying that the EFF leader Julius Malema was correct in calling for the Zimbabwean Embassy to be closed immediately in the country, and failing so, any Zimbabwean government official speaking in our shores here in South Africa would be stopped from speaking, also going as far as to say that it is the presidency of President Emerson Mnangagwa in Zimbabwe that is spitting on the graves of Zimbabwe's liberation icons such as Robert Gabriel Mugabe, who was later on in his later years going towards his passing a political nemesis or political foe of Emerson Mnangagwa, but also saying that the human rights violations in Zimbabwe should be stopped with immediate effect by the government of the day, with Emerson Mnangagwa earlier on through ZBC addressing the nation and saying nothing about the human rights violations and the protests taking place in Zimbabwe as the cases of COVID-19 increasingly rise in the country, and also the nursing of that particular country being on strike as well.
Samkele Maseko there, speaking to the EFF International Relations head, Mr. Godrich Gardee.